10,000 people a day are turning 60, and we're still hearing the same refrain, and it's confusing. On the one hand, we celebrate this gain of 30 years in longevity since the beginning of the last century. You go to the doctors, whoops, something just fell, but and they tell you to eat your cruciferous vegetables and to reduce stress and walk around the block so you can live yet longer. And then while you're in the waiting room, you pick up the paper and there's the story, the headline in the op-ed section about the gray tsunami or the age quake. It's almost as if, FEMA is sponsoring the entire demographic transformation. And there was even, I kid you not, the Atlantic Monthly, that great respectable journal that I subscribe to every year, had an article a few years ago with the title, "The Coming Death Shortage." And it reminds me again of, outsourcing is one option. Christopher Buckley, who wrote Thank You for Smoking, wrote a book before that called Boomsday, which is about euthanasia for boomers at 70. So there are some solutions being proposed to this change that are already out there. I commend them to you. I wanted to, in the next 6 minutes, because it's a short talk, just say that I think that an alternative, just in case those two don't work out, is a dramatic, radical rethinking of the second half of life along the lines that Hugh B. Jones articulated there. We hear 60 is the new 40, you're supposed to cling to your fast-fading youth. At the same time, you get senior citizen discounts at 60 or 50. So 60 is the old 80. At the same time, it's the new 40. I want to suggest that 60 is the new 60, and that actually we're witnessing in front of us the invention of an entirely new stage of life, one between the middle years and anything resembling true old age. William Gibson, the science fiction writer, says the future's already here, it's just unevenly distributed. And I think that hidden in plain sight is this transformation in what a life looks like, and particularly what these years look like. And we see the famous people, Bloomberg and Clinton and Gates, but beneath those headline and headliners are millions of people who are trying to come up with a sustainable and beautiful vision for this period. And it's what I think is so important about it is it's a real alternative to the vision of later life that got concocted 50 years ago. In 1948, Walter Reuther, the great labor leader, described retirees as too old to work, too young to die. It was essentially this limbo land floating between the end of work and the end of life, and we concocted this pale version of youth called the golden years, graying as playing, as a way for people to get through that period, to find some reason to get up in the morning. And it worked when there were just a few years at the end of life and people working at hard industrial jobs, but it was never designed to be a 30-year balloon payment at the end of life, of leisure. That's unattainable, it's unsustainable. And I think that there turns out to be another vision for that period that comes from much earlier, from none other than the guy who invented adolescence in America, G. Stanley Hall. He wrote a book in 1904 called Adolescence, 1,000-page book at the age of 60. So youth was actually invented by a 60-year-old, as it turns out. And 20 years after that, he said, I made a big mistake. I should have never invented teenagers. I should have invented a new stage of life between midlife and old age. And he described it beautifully. He called it an Indian summer. And I know, talking to an audience in Portland, that there's a great appreciation of an Indian summer. It's something you really savor, because you know it's not going to go on forever. And he said, we rarely come to anything like a masterly grip till the shadows begin to slant eastward. And for a season, which varies greatly with individuals, our powers increase as the shadows lengthen. And I think the essence of what Hall was saying, which is even more true today, is that there is a sweet spot in life where you get to the point where you have the benefits of experience and time lived, but even more powerfully, there's a realization that there are fewer years ahead than there are behind. Around that time left to live becomes as powerful a motivation as the benefits of experience that went beforehand. And it almost is it reminds me of the French Revolution slogan, fraternity, liberty, equality. This is like mortality, longevity, urgency. You realize that the road doesn't go on forever. You know, even Steve Jobs couldn't do anything about mortality, right? I mean, you get to a point in life where that becomes much more of a reality than it ever was beforehand. And yet, on the other hand, you pick up, you know, the longevity tables, and you realize you probably have another 20, 25 years left. But then you remember how quickly the last 20 years went by, and you realize that you better get going. So it's mortality, longevity, and urgency in my mind. And I think what that very powerfully drives people towards not only is a sense of purpose, but this question of legacy. Erik Erikson said that the hallmark of successful development in this period of life could be encapsulated in the phrase, "I am what survives of me." And I think what so many people can do reaching this period today is not just leave a legacy in those terms, but to actually live one. That's the intersection of wisdom and action. And I think when you couple that with demography and these 10,000 a day moving into this period, you have something that's very powerful. I think we have to figure out the social innovations that can make the most of this demographic transformation coming our way. Just think of aging. Over the last half century, we invented retirement communities, places like Sun City and Leisure World. We invented AARP, lifelong learning, senior centers, Social Security and Medicare, the Older Americans Act. You can go on and on. It was a spectacular period of creativity, and I think we need to muster that same kind of imagination and dynamism and commitment to help transform this demographic wave, which is inexorably coming our way, into something that not only works well for the people who are arriving at that juncture now, but for all the younger people who are projected to live even longer. Half the children born since the year 2000 in the developed world are projected to see their 100th birthday. So I think that this is not just an opportunity to solve a problem in the moment, but to solve one that could last for generations to come. I think we can release an extraordinary windfall of talent for the issues that we all care about. At Encore.org, we're focused on the Encore career movement. 9 million people have already moved into Encore careers. 31 million more say that it's a top priority to do so. They last about 10 years. If you add all that stuff up and multiply it by 10, you come up with 400 million years of human capital that could be applied to some of the most challenging problems of the day. You know, those of us in the nonprofit sector, we're used to that question, what if money was no object? What if talent was no object? We hear about dependency ratios with these changes. I think that this is an abundance problem that we're facing. And I'll end by just saying that I think that the changes that are in front of us, the possibilities, aren't just one of human capital, but it's an opportunity to change the whole culture, because I think the great tragedy of the last 50 years is that we told older people essentially to pretend that they were younger people, to have this second childhood. And we just can't keep doing that anymore. We can't afford it. We need to go with the grain of human nature, because human beings were set up as they grow older to think about what passes on. William James, the great American philosopher, said the great use of life is to spend it for something that outlasts us. And George Valent, who's a psychiatrist at Harvard today, says it more simply. He says biology flows downhill. So should society. We rerouted the river of life 50 years ago, and I think we need to take it back on its natural course. And when we do that, older people will invest in younger people will live more fulfilling and longer lives, and they too will invest in younger people, and will make these big changes, large numbers of older people, smaller numbers of young people who are more precious, something that works for us and not against us. That's a revolution that I think we all can embrace. Thank you.